Hi everyone, this video is going to look at cinema in the Depression era in England as part of the leisure unit on theatre, stage and screen, as we are now in the modern era. So to start us off, I thought we could just have a little refresher about what the Great Depression was. Now we've looked at it in America, so you should be able to apply your knowledge to England. So just bullet point down 3 or 4 ideas. What was the Great Depression like? And if you are on a live lesson, please drop them in the chat box as well. So pause the video, date, title, and task. Now, it's important to remember that the depression isn't a mental health illness in this sense. It's talking about an economic depression, which is where there's less money in the economy and therefore fewer jobs and more poverty. So we'll go through the whole chronological story because it's really important that you know where the context comes from. So it all starts off in the roaring 20s, where life was pretty good. There was lots of disposable income. It's a time of greater freedom for women, particularly young people as well. And it's all about parties, alcohol, new businesses, stock market, speculation, all things like that, which we know leads to the Wall Street crash in America on the 29th of October 1929. And that causes a global depression. So if you think back to your USA unit, you'll know it leads to 24.9 million unemployed in America. If you think back to your Germany unit, it's 9 million unemployed. It's a similar picture in England. It's not as bad as it was in Germany and America, because they relied on each other for money, but it's still pretty bad in England. And like I said, it leads to job losses, loss of houses, suicide rates increase, marriage rates decrease, all sorts of things. Now we have 3 massive key terms for you guys to know today. The first thing is the talkies, which was kind of slang for films where speeches and sounds are made. Because if you've ever seen any very, very old movies, they're silent movies. So you'd go and watch them in the cinema and they would have like words on the screen, a bit like subtitles, but without the picture at the same time. And there'd often be like a little piano player at the bottom, just like playing a little tune to the movie. So it's very, very different from what we're used to. You've also got a man called Charlie Chaplin. So he is an actor famous for his silent film roles, particularly his one character called the Tramp between 1910 and the 1930s. And you've also got Marie Lloyd, an actress who is known as Queen of the Music Hall. We looked at her in a bit more detail in a previous video. So go ahead, pause the video and get down those 3 key terms. Now, in order for you to kind of fully grasp the chronology and just how different film was in this era, I've got 6 videos for you to watch. Now, the links to these will all be in the description in the YouTube video, so you might have to like come out and go through a few things. But you've got the first ever film clip that we know of. You've got the first ever movie, and it is deliberately in inverted commas. You'll see why when you watch it. I've also shown you a brief view of Charlie Chaplin's comedy, but if you watch it from 10 minutes and 30 seconds, because the introduction was a bit boring. You've got the first ever talkie film, and like I cannot overstate how revolutionary a talking movie was. Completely brand new technology. Like no one had ever heard any of these actors talking before, so it was monumental. I've also got the first Disney film to show you, just because it's quite interesting. And then to help you apply your context, I've given you a song from Pinocchio, which was released in 1940, so right at the start of World War II. And I would just want you to think about why this song would appeal. So go ahead, pause this video. It's probably going to take about 10 minutes for you to explore these films, and do make sure you're going in order. Okay, so now you've kind of seen the things we're going to be talking about, we can actually look at the history of them. So I'm going to take you through a few slides now, and then I'm going to ask you to do kind of a flow diagram of the development of cinema. So after the First World War, the combined threat of cinema and radio saw a decline in music hall attendance, although they did survive into the 1930s, where new forms of cine variety shows are performed. But the one threat that the music halls would not survive was television, but we'll look at that next lesson. Film began in the 1890s when motion picture cameras appeared and production companies were set up. Now, the first public performance of film before a paying audience was at the Polytechnic in London in 1896. Now, these films lasted less than a minute and had no sound, but they were a huge novelty, and they were shown in music halls, travelling fairs, converted buildings, and then eventually purpose-built cinemas. So again, like brand new technology. Maybe some people had never seen a train before. And by 1914, there were over 4,000 cinemas or flea pits in Britain. Now, there was little comfort, and audiences were unruly. It was quite a lawless place, the original cinemas. And films were black and white and silent, and a pianist would interpret the action in order to create the mood. And people flocked to the cinema to view exotic dramas featuring Rudolph Valentino and the slapstick comedy of Charlie Chaplin. So this is some of the original camera equipment. As you can see, it's massive, and you may well have seen in some films the film that they used. It's massive, kind of dinner plate size reels of films have to be developed in a very specific way. Whereas nowadays, like look how teeny tiny our cameras are, and think about how better the picture is. So I just thought that was quite a cool comparison for you guys to see. Admission to the cinema was cheap and attracted many working class people and was dubbed the poor man's theatre. So the theatre remained mostly for the rich, but the cinema was quite cheap. And some observers at the time were concerned about the adverse or negative effect the movies might have on people, especially the young. Now, that's always a fear. Anytime any new technology comes out, they seem to think the youth is going to absolutely implode and not be capable of doing anything. And by the 1920s, the cinema had become the most popular form of entertainment, and as a result of investment, new luxurious cinemas or dream palaces were built. Advances in technology improved the quality of films, and the piano was placed by large organs with sound effects. When Al Johnson spoke the immortal words, wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet, in The Jazz Singer in 1927, the talkies had arrived. This was the first feature-length motion picture with synchronized dialogue sequences, so sound that matched their mouth movements. The cinema continued to attract huge audiences, with half the population of Britain attending at least once a week. And the 1930s are regarded as the golden age of cinema, with stars such as Clark Gable, Greta Garbo, the Marx Brothers, and of course Mickey Mouse. And it was a way of escaping the hardships of the Depression in the 1930s, and it also served as a morale booster during the Second World War, which improved people's moods. So as mentioned, I'd like you now to create a flow diagram like the one on the right about the development of the cinema. You're going to need to rewind this video a little bit to do that, but don't forget to include key facts, dates, and examples. Also, just a note on Charlie Chaplin then. So Charles Spencer Chaplin was born in London, April 16th, 1889. His father was a versatile vocalist and actor, and his mother, known under the stage name of Lily Harley, was an attractive actress and singer. So he's a purebred entertainer. However, Charlie was thrown on his own resources before he reached the age of 10, as the early death of his father and the subsequent illness of his mother made it necessary for Charlie and his brother Sidney to fend for themselves. So Charlie Chaplin's got quite a tragic backstory. But during the Depression, um, he did a lot of comedy. The sound film was firmly established by the 1930s. And this new revolution was a bigger challenge to Chaplin than to other silent stars. So his tramp character was universal, and his mime was understood in every part of the world. So it kind of didn't matter if you didn't speak English with Charlie Chaplin. He was popular in France just as he was in England because the silliness of it was appealing to everyone. But when the tramp now began to speak English, the worldwide audience would instantly shrink. So Chaplin had quite a difficult time adapting to the talkies and ultimately didn't really make it that successfully. So what you're going to have to do now is there is another link in this YouTube, in the description in YouTube, to one of Charlie Chaplin's programs called Modern Times. You only need to watch a couple of minutes to get the feel for it. And again, it's probably not going to be your cup of tea, so don't judge it by your standards. But think about what people at the time would have found funny about Charlie Chaplin. Also, how do you think the audience would react to Charlie Chaplin's song? And did you find the clip to be enjoyable, and explain your reasoning? Okay. So this is the most important bit of the lesson where you analyze your context of things going on at the time. And you need to explain why cinema was popular in the Depression era. And you need to use the words below to formulate 4 sentences. You've got new technology, cheap prices, famous faces, and hardship. So each of those is going to be a sentence, and you need to explain why that led to being popular in the era of the Great Depression. And this is what you're going to need to email your teachers as proof that you have done the lesson. So pause the video, do the task, and then email it to your teachers. And of course, don't forget you'll show my homework quiz 3 times. Bye!